Let's start with the most basic question, probably the most fundamental question we can confront in a forest ecology class. What is a forest? Let's get started on the same page. And I ask that question because forests can look so different and yet so similar. For example, here's a photograph from the south of Portugal, and these forests, in many respects, look very similar to those that one would find in Sonoma County. They have a lot of the same seasonal patterns. They have a lot of the same genera of species. The canopy structure looks very similar, and yet there are also some major differences. Most notably, this forest includes within it a lot of grassland and a lot more than the previous photo that I showed you from Portugal. So what are forests and what unites those two very different kinds of looking systems? Well, no matter where we look across the world, no matter the system, forests are ecosystems which are dominated by trees and where trees create the essential ecosystem structure of the system. And that's true whether we look at this example from Portugal or we look in Sonoma County. Even though there's a lot of grassland, trees are creating the essential ecosystem structure. However, what is driving when you have trees dominating that ecosystem structure? And the answer is mostly precipitation and temperature. Precipitation and temperature and their variation or their interactions is going to create a lot of the structure that we see across different kinds of forests. For example, what we would classify as tropical rainforests would be warm and they would be wet, just like the name implies. Whereas other kinds of forests may be dominated by the seasonality of rainfall, the extremes of temperature, and that becomes more and more clear, especially as one moves north into the northern forests, boreal forests, and everything in between those extremes is going to be influenced by the patterns of precipitation and temperature. One of the most prominent differences in ecosystem types that you'll see in the western U.S. is, and in fact, everything west of the Mississippi River in the United States is controlled. The variation in ecosystem structure is going to be controlled by the timing of precipitation. Now, what I'm really talking about is the distribution of grasslands. When do grasses dominate over forests? Timing of precipitation is the key. And in particular, if the precipitation, precipitation in two systems where there's a lot of competition between grasses and trees, the factor that will determine which group of plants is most dominant is going to be the timing of precipitation, and particularly winter precipitation tends to favor trees. That's on the really big scale, but you can have that kind of variation on the small scale as well. Here is a photograph from Humboldt County. This is the Bald Hills area. It's part of Redwood National Park. Here you've got a very wet ecosystem. It should be dominated by trees, but history, patterns of burning, particularly patterns of burning by the indigenous people of the area, as well as some influence of soils, here is favoring grasses over trees. Of course, if this structure is maintained by management, it requires management to perpetuate it. And one of the problems that Redwood National Park is having in the Bald Hills area is invasion of trees into these what have been grasslands up to this point, and a lot of the management is actually aimed at limiting that. Here's just an example from very nearby in Humboldt County, just to make the point. Without burning, you get dominance of trees. And the last factor I just want to mention very quickly is age. Time. Time creates a lot of complexity in forests. It influences the distribution of species, not so much the distribution of forests, but it's an important factor that affects all kinds of forests, and the most obvious place to see it is in old-growth forests. This is the Pisgah forest in New Hampshire. Here's a little levity for you. That's me 20 years ago. Still got the beard. This is an ecosystem. It's old. It's got, especially for the northeastern U.S., it's got lots of old trees. And you can see this effect, or the effect of time in the structure of the forest distribution. Lots of large trees and some large dead trees and lots of large logs on the ground. So from there, let's talk about what creates specific forest types when we look across the variation across